Our second segment in our first proper story for this edition of the Rolling Stone, I have to set up a little backstory for it first, okay? And if I start yelling and screaming, I apologize in advance, because this story infuriates me. Which, I mean, a lot of stories that I cover here, they do on some level infuriate me. But this one hits close to home because it has to do with the musical 1776. And if you don't know what 1776 is about, let me just give, like I said, a brief backstory, small history lesson. Here we go. 1776 is a musical, duh. And it was created in collaboration by two men. Sherman Edwards, who wrote the music and the lyrics, and a guy named Peter Stone, who wrote the original book, okay? They collaborated together, and as the title might imply, 1776, it is about the founding of the United States. The characters are the founding fathers. They are there in Philadelphia in Independence Hall in the summer of, you guessed it, 1776, and they are debating whether the American colonies should become independent or not from England. Remember, at this point in time, in 1776, the Revolution has already been fighting for a year. Lexington and Concord, the battles of Lexington and Concord were in April of 1775. The Battle of Bunker Hill was in June of 1775. Early in 1776, March of 1776, George Washington, who had been appointed by the Continental Congress as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army, the newly dubbed Continental Army, he frees Boston from Britain. He drives the British troops out of Boston, and after that point in time, everything in the Revolution pretty much goes south for the rest of the year, which is an interesting historical little caveat, since we usually think of, 1776, a wonderful year, the founding date of the United States. Yeah, not very many good things happened in 1776, primarily because the British took New York. Washington was unable to defend New York from the British, which was a big deal. Not only was New York the biggest city in the colonies at that time, but when the British took New York and the Hudson Valley, they said, now we can separate the New England colonies from the rest of the colonies, and then we can pick them off one by one. So, 1776, all this is happening. The men of the Continental Congress are still debating whether they should try to reconcile with England, declare independence, and the gist of the play, of this musical that Peter Stone and Edward Sherman wrote, has to do with the Declaration of Independence. That's one of the main features of the play. And spoilers, but the play ends with the members of the Congress actually signing the Declaration. It premiered on Broadway, 1969. Columbia Pictures made a movie version of it in 1972, with actually several members of the original cast from Broadway cast again in their roles for the movie version. And I saw the movie version. I've never seen it live on stage, but I saw the movie version, when I was 10 or 11, and even though I had always had an appreciation and an interest in American history, watching that movie at my grandparents' house, that was actually one of the defining moments where it was like, I love American history. It also, coincidentally, started my admiration and my appreciation for John Adams. Poor John Adams, he still more often than not, gets neglected, overlooked, and forgotten, sandwiched as he is between George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, two men of huge historical importance and stature. And here's, poor John Adams, who kind of gets lost in the shuffle. But John Adams is actually the main character of the play and therefore the movie. And so that's where I started getting my appreciation for John Adams, and he very soon became my personal favorite of the founding fathers. After George Washington, of course. So, that's 1776, the musical. Is it historically accurate? Is it completely historically accurate? No. Absolutely not. Now, that my background is in history, and particularly American history, you can look at the way the founding fathers are portrayed. You can look at some of the events and be like, no, this person really wasn't like that. That didn't really happen. That's not quite the whole story. But still, it's a musical. It's supposed to bring the spirit of the time alive to a contemporary audience. And even though it failed critically and commercially, the movie did when it came out in 1972, I still think it's great. I don't particularly like musicals as a genre, but this is one of my favorites, okay? This is a musical that I love to sit down and watch, especially around Independence Day. So, that's the background of it, okay? We've got a play about the Founding Fathers and the Declaration of Independence. That's what the play is about, okay? So, listen to this headline from Pink News, which is the pro-LGBTQIA2+ news organization that is based in the UK. Headline: Broadway revival of classic musical 1776 will have an entirely female, non-binary, trans, and genderqueer cast. Oh yeah, they went there. They definitely went there. Let me just keep reading to you a few paragraphs. Broadway audiences are set to see a revival of the musical comedy 1776 in spring 2021, and it'll feature an entirely female, non-binary, and genderqueer cast, the American Repertory Theater announced Thursday. The production of the Sherman Edwards and Peter Stone's classic will be directed by Diane Paulus, who won a Tony Award for her direction of Pippin, and choreographed by Jeffrey Page. Now, oh my gosh, there is so much. Every time I think about this story, gang, I'm sorry. Let me calm down so I can be rational. In the first place, this is nothing more than a huge slap in the face to Sherman Edwards and to Peter Stone. Diane Paulus, the American Repertory Theater, and every single stinking person involved in this production is basically spitting on these two men. They are taking their work, Edwards and Stone's work, and they are twisting it and repackaging it just so that it can fit a particular socio-political vision of today. That's it. You know what? If you want to make a play that, let me get all of the buzzwords here, that has an entirely female, non-binary, trans, and genderqueer cast, gesundheit! Go for it! But write it yourself. Write that play. Come up with the story. Come up with the dialogue. Come up with the characters. Create your own story. I mean, isn't that what Broadway is supposed to be all about? Isn't it supposed to be creation? Isn't that what art is supposed to be? Okay? Forget for a moment whether this play is actually art or not. I would maintain that it is not. But let's move past that for just 1 second. Isn't the entire purpose of art the creative process? Don't we talk about the creative process? What the hell is creative with taking the work of two other men and simply saying, oh yeah, we're just going to make it all female and genderqueer and trans, and that's going to be it. We're not going to change anything else. We're going to keep the dialogue, we're going to keep the story, we're going to keep the setting, we're going to keep everything else, but that's the only thing we're going to change. Aren't we grand? Aren't we brave? Aren't we just sticking our finger to the man, to the system, to the evil, white, patriarchal, cis-normative, binary system? Aren't we just so brave? You know what? No. You're not artists. You're vandals. That's what you are. Okay? That's point number one. Point number two. It is an even bigger insult to the men of 1776 The people who actually suffered, sacrificed so much of their lives so that we could basically live in decadence today in 2020. In such decadence that this sort of baloney can actually be produced of their own lives. This complete fractioning and destruction of their lives. Because guess what? The men of 1776, like it or not, there were no women at the Continental Congress in 1776. No women signed the Declaration of Independence. If that insults you, I'm sorry. But that is a historical fact. What we used to call a fact. An unmovable... It's an unmovable part of history. It cannot be rewritten. Okay? I don't have a TARDIS. I don't have a time machine. I don't have Doc Brown's DeLorean. I don't have any of those things, and neither do you. And guess what? Neither does anyone else. You can't go back to 1776 and muck around in the past. Oh, and by the way, even if you tried, it would probably end up like Ray Bradbury's story, The Sound of Thunder, where stepping and killing one tiny butterfly completely changes the present. Okay? A really, really bad example, a striking example of the butterfly effect, if there ever was one. Okay? Don't meddle, in other words. But these men, John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Caesar Rodney, Benjamin Harris, Thomas Stone, Edward Rutledge, all of these people, I could keep listing them. Benjamin Franklin was another one. John Dickinson was another one. James Wilson, Roger Sherman, okay, Robert Livingston. All of these men, whether we remember them or whether we don't, not only did they sacrifice their time, not only did they put their own businesses and their own prospects on hold, but every single man there at that Congress, every single man who signed the Declaration of Independence was basically signing his own death warrant. Because, remember, gang, there was no guarantee in 1776 that the Continental Army was going to be successful. There was no guarantee that the revolution was going to succeed. In fact, when these men signed the Declaration of Independence, it looked like just the opposite. It looked like that the revolution was going to fail. And if it had failed, those men would have been hanged for treason. All of a sudden, they wouldn't have been revolutionaries. They wouldn't have been founding fathers. They would have been traitors. Traitors to the crown. And the crown would have dealt with them justly. On that alone, we should have some sort of, at the very least, lowest common denominator, begrudging respect for what they did. Because what they did, again, has allowed us to live like kings today. Okay? And sure, there's still poverty, there is still injustice, there are still all those sort of things here in 2020 America. But you know what? As bad as it can get over here, it's even worse in other parts of the country. At least we don't take orphans and mutilate them, cut off limbs, scar them, throw acid on their face to make them as pitiful as possible in the hopes that people will give them money so that we can turn around like an Oliver Twist and basically have a gang of beggars, of pitiful beggars, so that we can make a profit from the suffering of children. Okay? That happens in India. That, honest to God, happens in India. It's something that few people, I should say, can wrap their minds around, because they cannot contemplate that sort of, that sort of evil could still exist today in the modern age. That happened in the past. That's been scrubbed away. No, it is still happening in parts of the world. Okay? So every time I think of that, it just thank your lucky stars that you were born here and not in a place like India. Honestly. Okay? So for that reason, that's point number 2. Just for the begrudging lowest common denominator respect that we should have for the founders and what they did. This is, a travesty. But then comes the third point, okay? And I'm going to read to you another paragraph from this story in Pink News, okay? And this is it. The refreshed retelling seeks to prompt a contemporary rethinking of the Founding Fathers. And we'll see the likes of actors Crystal Lucas Perry, John Adams, Patrina Murray, Benjamin Franklin, Carrie O'Malley, John Dickinson, and Sarah Porkolab, Edward Rutledge star. And there you have it. They let the cat out of the bag. A refreshed retelling, seeks to prompt a contemporary rethinking of the Founding Fathers. In other words, what this is propaganda. Pure and simple. It actually goes back to our first segment from last week's Rolling Stone, where we were talking about AOC and drag queens and about the power of story and of art. This is another example of that. They are taking real men who lived, breathed, worked, suffered, sweated, and eventually died, as we all are going to die. And they are completely twisting their names, their legacies, and their image, who they were. They are, gang. This is what's happening. They are appropriating these men. Not just their memories, they are appropriating these men. Remember how furious the left is when some character is appropriated, or when cultural appropriation happens, like a white dude wears a sombrero, or if, oh my gosh, this character in this obscure comic book was, I don't know, Asian, like Korean in her original comic book, but now she's going to be played by, oh my gosh, Scarlett Johansson or something. Oh my gosh, cultural appropriation, whitewashing, how terrible. Imagine if, okay, that's their reaction when it comes to made-up characters. This is happening to actual real men. I will reiterate, men who suffered, men who breathed and sweated and died, which would be bad enough, but who did all of those things for us, for you and for me, so that we could live in a free, self-governing, prosperous country. And all for the furtherance of an ideological talking point. That is what is happening. That is what is happening here in this story. It's not just, another example of, oh my gosh, the activist LGBTQ community is up to their old tricks and trying to make everything about itself. No. It goes deeper than that. And if to make kind of a subsection A of that third point, it is another example of how comfortable we are now with historical rewriting. Has there been really any great revolt against this news story? No. Has anyone gotten mad with it? No. Has anyone, been protesting about it? No. Has anyone even really been talking about it? No. No. Because we don't care. Because since history is not something that we can sense, it's not something that we can touch or see, and because it doesn't have market value anymore, we might complain about it, The Wunderkind Ben Shapiro might spend a couple of minutes on his podcast talking about it, but is anyone actually going to protest? Is anyone actually going to do anything about it? Is anyone going to actually point down and say, these are the problems, except for maybe a few individuals? And I don't count myself in there because, again, I'm a small little minnow, guys, okay? I have no power whatsoever, and that's not false modesty or anything like that. That's just God's truth right there. But the fact that there has been no outcry over this, that actually might be the most worrisome part about it, that there has been no outcry over this, because it shows just how comfortable we are with historical rewriting. Oh yeah, that's just what happens anymore. I can't help but think of a line from G.K. Chesterton's ballad, The Ballad of the White Horse, his novel-length poem, when he's talking about the white horse, and where he says that if you would have the horse of old, you must scrub the horse anew. Meaning that if you want to keep the good things that have been handed down to us, then you have to actually actively work to preserve them. Because if you don't, they're going to be lost. And unfortunately, the trajectory that we're on has us losing all of our history and therefore our soul and who we are. That is story number 2.